everybody, and welcome to Society AMA. I am very excited for our guest. We have the ex-CMO of Demandbase joining us today, Peter Isaacson. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thanks, Garrett. Glad to be here and loved your walk-up music, by the way.
Oh, man, that's the whole creative team here. They do an amazing job. So, no, man, it's super exciting. And a little bit about the show, okay? So Society is an amazing community of SaaS marketers from all across the industry and a lot of really brilliant minds from a lot of different SaaS organizations. And what we had them do is kind of prepare some questions that they wanted to ask you. And they're actually really, really detailed. So can we dive into the first one?
Let's go.
All right. So our very first question comes from Matt Field. And he asked, how will the end of third-party cookies influence ABM marketing as a whole? This was a tough one because I don't have even enough of my own context around where cookies are going. But I do know, obviously, they're trying to remove them, especially with Google. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, man, we really are just diving right in.
There was no warm-up.
No warm-up at all. So, I think that first of all, thank you for having me on this show. And I got to call you out for not wearing green today, but that's okay. But for this question, so a couple of things. One, I'm not so sure that it's an absolute certainty, like how third-party cookies are going to be handled, right? Like Google came out with a very kind of provocative, like we're going to phase them out at a certain time. Unless something's happened over the last month that I haven't seen, they haven't been pressing that as hard. And maybe that's just them kind of re-evaluating kind of how life in a post-cookie world is going to look and how they're going to drive their business and things like that. But the idea of third-party cookies going away, likely, but not absolutely certain at this point. The basis for ABM has always been, though, around the IP identification and being able to target the companies themselves, right? So having third-party cookies has helped make that more accurate, has helped you get more granular in terms of the buying committee and things like that. But I think that there are other ways that companies like Demandbase are looking at to actually get at those buying committees, whether it's more contextual based targeting that gets layered into the IP based targeting, things like that. So ABM is actually, I think, in better position than most digital advertising to actually thrive in a post-cookie world, because it's still all about targeting the company and actually using other means to get a little bit more granular, again, through contextual advertising that can get much more sophisticated than it was back, when it was introduced back in the 2000s, to actually get at those folks that are leaning into your product and most likely part of the buying committee.
Yeah, so Peter, along those lines, though, I think you had a good follow-up question. It was, will it affect any of the ABM providers doing the IP targeting, right? Is that still an effective way to reach an account? And now I know I personally, to add on this question, you're at your house.
Yep.
A lot of us are at our house, especially if you're selling into marketers. In other words, a lot of marketing, you and I in our world, right? I sell into marketers. It's very much remote friendly business unit, let's say. So with ABM and COVID and remote becoming the actuality instead of like a sliver of the data, a majority of the data, how does that still work? What should we be aware of as advertisers?
Yeah, I think as I said, the IP targeting is still going to be super relevant and still kind of forms the basis. I mean, account-based marketing is all about identifying and engaging the right accounts, and you're still going to be able to do that. What Demandbase is doing is trying to work with specific vendors who also have some first party data available, right? So first party data becomes even more important and valuable, and actually layering that into the IP targeting to actually make sure that you're reaching the right people at that right company.
So that's like a CDP kind of thing. So we're like using like a CDP to kind of match that data to more other properties from other databases.
Exactly. And a company like Demandbase has essentially an embedded CDP where you're taking lots of data in, synthesizing it, managing it, and actually leveraging it so that you can create audiences with it and then push it out through a lot of different channels. It basically operates as a CDP within the platform. Right now, third-party cookies are a piece of that, data stream that comes in, but that's one data stream. It's important right now, but there are other data streams, and especially first-party data will become more and more important.
No, I love that answer. And along those same lines, nobody asked this question, but I was always curious about it, so I'd love to follow up. When I've done ABM, like I've used Terminus, for example, and I get a large organization in my audience pool, I was able to frequency cap them. So I found that large accounts with large marketing functions evaporated my share very, very quickly. Is there a way, if I were to use Demandbase, to frequency cap? So if I accidentally, let's say, have Intel in, do you get what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden,
totally,
75% of my impressions are Intel, and then my budget's gone. So like, is there a way to do that with Demandbase or other platforms?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely why Demandbase actually invested in creating their own DSP early on, right? Like, because, having frequency cap, like there are a lot of ABM, solutions out there for advertising, digital advertising that basically behave like a B2C type digital experience, right? And it doesn't have things like frequency capping. And that sucks for a marketer if you've actually targeted, 100 companies that you want to advertise to, and 2 of them are Intel and Oracle. And whoa, all my impressions just got spent on 2, and like another 98 got nothing, right?
And the irony is the 98 are the ones you probably could have maybe got action out of. If you ever sold into Intel and Oracle, it's not like it's just one touch and you're good to go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So so that's the benefit of having a Demandbase that has its own DSP, because we've actually created frequency capping and some other things that that B2B marketers need in order to be successful with their digital advertising and not blow it either, quite honestly, in the first week of a 4-week campaign or over 2 companies when they're trying to hit 100.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now we have another question from Pete Jones. Pete, kind of everybody's hammering this nail. So I want to see if I can nail you down on a specific answer here. So how does Demandbase target people who are working from home? Like how does, you know what I mean? Like how does that work? Just so, because I don't think anyone ever tells us, and so we never really believe them, if that makes sense. Is there, what's going on there?
I mean, right now, a big part of this is a combination of IP addresses plus cookies. And, getting into fairly sophisticated use of that to identify kind of what sites the person's going to, and, what content they're consuming, and have they ever been on the home network of, the work network and things like that. Again, like, and that's, still going on at this point. What Demandbase has been looking at, because that world, as we talked about 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, may be changing. Not definitely, but may be changing. So smart companies like Demandbase are looking forward to it. So that's where it becomes kind of more reliant on first party data to actually start, connecting the IP addresses, even if it's a home IP address, to an individual that has identified themselves as part of this company, and given a company that information.
Yeah, and so I think, Pete, and maybe I'm just postrizing here, but maybe just to get some color to everyone who's listening, what they can do, and this is what, and you actually came from Saatchi, so you kind of know a little bit of like Group M in that world from what I've seen. And there's a ton of data out there, y'all. Okay, that nobody ever really is transparently telling us like they have, but it's out there. And what I mean by that is people like a Bombora have their script on very many websites. So they know what websites you're viewing, right? And they're shared in all these scripts and all these places. Bombora gives you their API, correct, Pete? So you are correct, Peter. So you can plug that in. And now you have an idea of intent. You also can buy data from other providers, and then you can match that to your data, right? And now you're creating essentially a persona that then you can give to your advertising clients to target, correct? So you're not just using IP addresses, you're using potentially hundreds of thousands of data points that are enriching around a actual individual, and one of those pieces is an IP address. Is that a fair assessment?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think there's
well said.
Yeah, we all are like, oh, ABM equals IP, and it's like, well,
no. I mean that goes back. That goes back to the idea of an embedded CDP. I mean, Demandbase, we've never really positioned it as a CDP, because then you get into selling to enterprise companies like, well, I already own a CDP, so why would I want to buy a CDP from you? So just to kind of streamline the messaging, we never really talk about it, but in fact, it actually behaves like that, pulling in data sources from a ton of different places and actually synthesizing it so that you can create audiences against it. So
yeah, like think about this, like Zoom
and IP addresses are just one of those sources.
100%. Like Zoom Info is a client of ours, and a lot of people don't realize, but they have an extension called Reach Out. That Reach Out extension would give you like 5 free email addresses, but you would have to give them your Gmail. And essentially, they would then go through your entire inbox, and that's how they build up-to-date emails. So all the extensions you have in Google Chrome, those extensions that you're not paying for, they're selling your data a lot of times. So like all these different pieces are what formulating their targeting. Now, Kelly had a great question, and now I think you can actually answer this one even better today. And she asked, what are some suggestions on getting ABM rolling without any of the fancy tools/platforms? So as the ex-CMO of Demandbase, how could people who want to get into ABM do so without Demandbase? You know, what's a good way for me to get started?
Yeah, I mean, so the way to get started, and quite frankly, I've had conversations with smaller companies that, you know, either just aren't ready to make the investment, or, you know, are a year or two away from having the budget to actually make that kind of investment. Or quite frankly, I've had conversations with folks that were ready to make the investment in Demandbase, and I said, don't do it, because you're not going to get the return, because you're not going to be investing enough in the digital advertising, things like that, to warrant the investment in the platform. So there are a lot of ways to just get started, but the first and foremost is really using whatever data that you've got at hand. Before we went on air, Garrett, you were talking about the different sources that you would pull together outside of an ABM platform, but actually using whatever data that you've got at hand through Salesforce and other tools to actually develop your target account list. Right? That's the start. That's a starting point for everyone, right? So yeah, you know, the Demandbase ABM platform can actually, you know, help you and identify. It's got a, you know, look-like modeling and predictive and intent-based, so you can prioritize and stuff. But you can actually and should actually jump in and start identifying that target account list and coordinating with your sales organization to actually do that without a platform, right? So that's first and foremost. Next thing is, like, how are you going to figure out like how to engage these folks, right? Like, you've got your target account list, right? Hopefully you've, you know, tiered it. So you've got kind of your most important, and you're going to, you know, invest a certain amount in each of those accounts. You got a next tier, maybe 3 tiers going up. So now you've got a different plan for engagement across those different tiers. And now it comes down to, like, how am I actually going to get, like, how many do I have in the database that are actually part of those, right? So I can email them. How many can I get into my webinars and other things? How, you know, LinkedIn, you talked about that again before we went on air, super effective, right? For actually getting to specific companies and some specific people within those companies. Doesn't have the scale. Some of the industries aren't as, you know, fully, you know, as robust as others in the LinkedIn universe. But those are things just to kind of get you going, because it's still about, the fundamentals of marketing, figuring out who your target audience is, in this case accounts, engaging them, right, through whatever channels you can. Just gave you a couple of examples, and then measuring the success of that.
I love that answer, Peter. I want to build off that too, because I've played around with ABM a lot, and it's actually completely changed our business. And what I found is the way I thought about ABM versus how I made ABM successful are two entirely different universes. So I think there's some things I think we should stop doing if we're going to do ABM. Number one, nobody wants your asset. I don't know. I know it's not necessarily fair to say, but I have never been able to get someone from, oh my God, I just saw your display ad, to I read your asset and I need to hire you. It's a very difficult connection that I just don't think it works. So number one, I'd say really master your offer. We give away $100 to anyone who takes a meeting with us. That made ABM work. Without that, it didn't work. Number one. Number two, while I love the platforms, if you can afford it, I'd go native. What I mean by that is, if you can run a convo ad to your ABM accounts, it's very much more effective than running a newsfeed ad. If you can run Facebook using ClearBidX and use B2B targeting on Facebook directly, and you can flip out your creative faster, you can test and run it natively in the Facebook platform, I found that works better. So I think master your offer. And I think the last part, and Peter, I'd love to get your take on this. We see ABM as the accounts we want instead of the accounts that we are best at selling to. And I can't tell you how bad we mess that up. In other words, we say, ooh, what we do this little executive meeting. We say, hey, I want every person in this room to list your 10 dream accounts. And then come back to us, and we're gonna figure out how we can break into those 10 dream accounts. Instead of going through your average order value, your close rate, and saying, oh, you know what, we're actually a mid-market company and we're great at mid-market, and we're just gonna focus on mid-market. How often have you seen, Peter, people use ABM to create focus instead of try to satisfy dreams? Do you know what I'm talking about here?
Yeah. 100%. So let me address that one first, since it's more topical. I want to go back to the assets though, at some point, but selling who you want to sell to versus who you should be selling to. So a couple of things on that. I mean, lookalike modeling's been around for a long time, and it's still an effective kind of filter, because there you're looking at kind of the characteristics of the companies that you have sold to, right? Yeah. And applying those. Second thing I would say is that it's not for us, you're talking to SaaS companies here, super important not just to focus on who you can sell and who you have sold to, but what your retention rates are for those companies. As an example, at Demandbase, we found we could sell to companies that were 25 million in revenue all day long. ABM was hot. We had some technology companies that were 25 million in revenue. They would buy in a heartbeat, and the sales cycles were super quick, actually. Yeah. What we found out was they were also the highest churn rate of any tier that we could get. So, right. Yeah. So it's the guys that are making quote on, selling these are happy. The customer success guys are getting screwed because they can't keep these folks because it's so volatile. Anyway, so it's not just about who you have success selling with, it's who you have success keeping, who are the best customers that you can really keep. So those are the kinds of things that you do really have to think about. The final point I'd make on this is an interesting one that we tested early on at Demandbase. We went through, and actually even before we had any type of account identification in our platform at Demandbase, this was back in 2015, 2014. Yeah. We used a third party using predictive to figure out who our target accounts were. And as we worked with the sales organization to do this, they were kind of partners, which is best practice in ABM. We got through the list, and a bunch of the sales guys were like, wait a second. I get that the data shows that this is my patch and these are the target accounts, but I know for a fact these 15 accounts that I know, want to buy us. Like, I know the CMO, or I've had experience selling to this company, things like that. So what we did was identify, we called it initially the AE Top 30, which was we allowed account reps to say, okay, in addition to what the data shows, I'm going to be able to self-select a group of accounts that I think should be in my patch. It was like, great. It solved a couple of things. One, it, took away some of the, no, you can't do it. It gave them some skin in the game, right? To say like, good, now I've really worked with the marketing team. I'm putting in some of my accounts. We've got some accounts from the data. Unbeknownst to the sales folks, and this is way back in 2014, 2015, we ran the data, my marketing ops folks ran the data on the close rates, ACV, pipeline velocity of those accounts that the data had said were the best targets versus the AE Top 30 that had been self-selected. We had better close rates, better ACV, better pipeline velocity for the accounts that Predictive showed were the accounts we should chase down versus the mindset of, no, these are the best accounts.
Can you
Garrett,
share
going
what
back to your
technology you used for that?
Yeah, it was actually Lattice back in the day.
No.
Yeah. Now part of Shashi, now part of D&B. That's not really their business anymore. They kind of pivoted into CDP land. So, but it was, we partnered with Lattice on that. But it goes back to your point of like who you think you want to sell to versus what the data actually shows are the folks that you need to sell to could be a pretty dramatic difference.
I love that. Now, Kelly had a follow-up question that I thought was great, and we're going to get to Carolyn's question next. But it was, does account-based scoring really work versus lead scoring? So, like, this whole scoring thing. So, I've been interviewing a ton of different executives for the last, 6 months, and everybody has a different opinion. Like, I got all in on scoring, let's say for my own business, and I can't tell you the last time I looked at someone's score. I don't know why. I don't ever look at it. I'm just laughing in my head because I'm like, I don't think I've ever looked at a score in like 6 months. But I went all in on my scoring model, and now I don't even look at it. So like scoring, account, lead, scoring in general. Like, what's your take on it?
Yeah, like a lot of things, I got a strong point of view on this. I think it's a total bullshit to assign a number to. Sorry, Irish. You can be free with your language. To attach a number to a score and say, oh, this one got an 83, the other one's got a 79. Like, okay, 83 is good, 79 bad, right? That makes zero sense because some of the scoring is the number attached to it can be a little bit arbitrary, especially
Harold,
if you're bringing in money.
Page 3 times instead of Susan, who did it twice. So Harold's way better, and you're like,
What I do think works and what we've got some data on to show is going through at least tiers and saying, especially with intent, saying that there are accounts that are showing high intent, there's accounts that are showing medium levels of intent, and accounts showing that there are low levels of intent. And we've actually, so it's a little bit more broad brush, but really effective at helping you prioritize and develop a strategy for engaging those accounts. Now, what we did at Demandbase, we ran an advertising test against each of those tiers. And what we found was, and we measured it as something that kind of connected between the advertising to those accounts and developing into a stage 1 pipeline opportunity. Not that advertising was like a direct, like, hey, you saw an ad and suddenly you went into pipeline, but there were other things at work, but we isolated advertising as a variable and we advertised against each of those tiers. What we found was the higher intent tier had a much stronger conversion rate into pipeline opportunities. Medium had less effective, less robust conversion into pipeline opportunities. Low had a smaller. That would lead you to believe to say, well, great. So only advertise to the to the top of the funnel. It really kind of depends on what I advocated to a lot of our customers was it depends on what your strategy is. If you have a limited advertising budget, absolutely go after those top tier because they're more likely to get into pipeline opportunities. if you have a bigger advertising budget and your strategy is you need to develop more at bats ultimately in the next quarter, the following quarter, and the quarter after that, then go after that low intent tier, because you can actually use advertising to get a cohort of those into pipeline where you might not have touched them with your other channels. So
I like that. No, Peter. Now Kelly's trying to put us in a corner. So Kelly, I like this. She just asked her own question. She said, good point. So do you use scoring to classify those tiers? So how do we get the tiers? Is that where we think scoring is more like to create buckets, but not to create focus? Is that like, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially it. And you do actually do scoring, right? There's a score that's associated with it. So yeah, behind the curtain, you've sussed it out, Kelly. There is some scoring that goes on with that. I guess the point, and this kind of goes back to a challenge we had with Lattice back in the day. Was that, there tends to be black boxes in the scoring, which is, we were told like, okay, you got this score, again, 83, this one's 79. Don't worry about why this is an 83 or why it's a 79. Just trust the fact that this is an 83 and a 79. One of the things that we really kind of focus on at Demandbase was not having a black box, right? So you knew why this score was what it was, right? And what the variables that contributed to it. And you could customize it yourself. Like, is on-site engagement super important to you? And, you want to like value that more? Well, dial that up, right? Yep. So it was transparency and visibility into it, but also not obsessing into this number is 2 points above that number. It's more kind of tiering is the most effective way to go for it, I believe.
I love that. And Kelly,
you're welcome, Kelly.
Now, hey,
can I just as we go on to the next question, I said I was going to circle back on the assets. You got I love provocative comments like assets don't work. I love those, all right, because those that's how you kind of remember things. It's like by being all mushy. I agree with you that like no way does, you run an ad, it links you to a piece of content, and then wow, they're pipeline stage 1 like, the next day because they love that.
SDRs hate those, right? Like if you work with an SDR team, the top of funnel asset download leads are the bane of their existence. Like,
no, you don't want to chase like, wow, they one piece of content and suddenly you want me to like do 20 calls against them? No way. Yeah, so, absolutely not. But where assets do play a role, right, is SEO and your search, right? Because if you develop a high value piece of content that a lot of folks are downloading, you actually, your search results go up.
I thought activation is my point. What I see across millions and millions and millions of dollars of spend is people are using assets for acquisition.
Yeah. And unless you're providing an offer, a specific offer, which it sounds like Garrett, you guys were doing, right? There's not a a 2-step path to like create an asset and get your pipeline opportunities, right? I mean, we've all seen and we created ourselves kind of the buyer's journey, and it's not 2 steps, it's 30, and it tends to go all over, up and back.
Right. But Peter, I think my point here, and I'm going to do another provocative statement, but I think assets are really just for lazy product and engineering teams.
I love it.
I'm being provocative here because it's true, and to a certain extent. What I mean by that is the only reason we're having to do top of funnel assets is because we aren't advanced enough in product-led growth to give our customers exactly what they want, which is knowing how the heck our product solves their problem. And I just don't believe in a world tomorrow. And I'm working with those enterprise companies right now, these publicly traded companies. They are all moving to product-led growth. There will not be such a thing as an enterprise sales environment that doesn't allow you to experience the product in 5 years. Like, I don't think that's going to exist, because if you think about what it takes to buy enterprise software and the fact that the market's evolving, it's entirely about adoption.
Yeah.
And if I can't understand your product as a buyer, how do I feel confident that your 6-month CS rollout is going to be so good and intuitive that it makes up for the fact that you haven't invested in your UI because you sell to enterprise? Like, I just don't like, why? Why are we doing that? In 2021, are we giving someone the ultimate guide to ABM instead of sending them to a demo environment of Acme Corp using Demandbase? Like, how is that better? I don't understand that one.
Yeah, I guess I would look at it as a yes and rather than an or. So slightly less provocative than yours. You might prove true. I do think that the trends of the consumerization of B2B and the actual ability to kind of taste, smell, and use the product and get a sense of it, hugely important and increasing importance, and that trend's gonna continue. I wouldn't dismiss for B2B marketers right now the value. Again, the folks gotta find you, right? They're still doing search terms on different things. And shout out to John Miller, former CEO of Engagio, now the head of product and marketing at Demandbase. He was really good at developing like a few core assets that were always top of the thing. Yeah.
But who else is even half as good? Let's just be honest. Like, I went through all his assets, right? The fishing boat where he's catching the fish, and he hired Velocity B2B to do the asset, and they crushed it. But that looks like a $250,000 asset. I mean, most of the people out here are creating
not even close, but yeah.
What do you think it was? How much do you think it cost?
I would say less than a tenth of that, because the content itself was created by internally, like it was by John and his team, and they were creating the content, and then had other folks kind of lay it out, kind of plus some of the terms and stuff like that. But it was a fraction of that. So content,
right? I mean, it's the best asset. It was the best assets. I actually wanted Engagio from reading the asset, and that's the only time in my life I've ever had that experience.
So that's why I say it's a yes and yeah, product-led growth, absolutely. And like, again, I think product-led growth is, to me, somewhat attached to the consumerization of B2B, right? Where B2B used to be, yeah, it's hard and it sucks and no one wants to use it, but hey, that's just the way it is. And then folks started actually realizing that, wait, if you consumerize the experience and make it more like the applications they're using every day, you'll get better uptake, better usage, better all of that kind of stuff. The product-led growth, you're used to being able to see a consumer asset, be able to check it out and try it and do things with it, and B2B is following that trend.
I love that. Now, last question. We're a little over, but I want to make sure we got to Carolyn. What's the best way to report on ABM metrics and success, especially up the chain? And I think to add some flavor to this, like, I don't think executives want to see account engagement as a KPI. I know that's sometimes what it is, but what's the best way for us to, because I know it's easy to sell ABM because everybody wants it. It's the shiny tool. You could sell it. Like you said, it's hard to retain that $25 million company. I found the same thing in our $25 million companies. It's hard to get them to want to renew on an ABM platform because they can just go native, they get more granularity, and they kind of learn from the experience. What should we be reporting on? What's the benefit of a platform? What does ABM reporting look like successfully in your mind?
Yeah, I've always divided it into leading and lagging measures, right? The leading measures are the things that marketers pay attention to because they're the canary in the coal mine and they're accessible very quickly, right? They're the campaign rates, it's account engagement, it's things like that, even down to like click-through rates, asset downloads, things like that, just to see kind of how your campaigns are performing.
Yeah.
God, don't present that to a C-level person. Nobody cares, right? That's inside baseball for marketing. Yeah. I always talk about the fact that you have to actually focus on the lagging measures, and lagging measures are getting as close to the business metrics as possible, meaning like what's driving revenue. You don't necessarily want to jump to just revenue or your overall retention rate, but a click before that is pipeline, stage one, close rates, super important to every SaaS business, ACV, and pipeline velocity. Like if you focus on those 4 core metrics and see how they're improving over time, and quite frankly, I've always advocated that for one of the things we haven't talked about, but I think is interesting, like more and more companies are seeing that like ABM, awesome, need to do it. It's one part of my go-to-market strategy, maybe the most important, but one part. And there's this other part of the funnel that's, typical demand gen, things like that. If you're doing ABM right, your pipeline, your funnel velocity, your ACV, your close rates should be higher for those target accounts that you're really focusing on than for the ones that are just knocking on the door, right? So do comparisons against those. What'd you say, Garrett?
I was just saying, like, what you're saying is, I think it's just the broader point is like, it's not all acquisition. Yeah. It's not ABM for acquisition. If you can do ABM for activation, you can also improve all your pipeline metrics which then increases your LTV CAC ratio, lowers CPA, and then creates essentially a business case for why we need this as a complementary channel, not just a solo channel of our strategy.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, and Carolyn, who asked the question, just keep in mind, like when you're selling it up the chain wants to understand business impact. So the closer you can get to demonstrating business impact and not worrying about those, campaign-centric metrics that are like good for you guys, but unless you can specifically attach them to business results, nobody cares as a CFO or a CRO or a CEO.
I love it. This has been amazing, Peter. Thank you so much for doing this AMA with us, and can't wait to see where you end up.
Yeah, stay tuned. A lot of interesting things going on out there in the space, so stay tuned.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Peter.
All right, thanks, Garrett.